All right, guys, let's do this. Welcome into the Tripod and another episode. And today will be breaking down the NRL Grand Final. We've waited a long time for this, and honestly, I do think we've got the Grand Final that we deserve. The Panthers against the Storm. I don't think you can really argue they've been the best two teams and the most consistent two teams throughout the entire season. So today we'll be breaking down every facet of that game that's going to be Sunday evening. But before we get into the game, you might have heard Jacob before, but we do have an exciting announcement. We're not going away. Obviously, State of Origin is happening after the NRL season is done this Sunday, and we'll still be here, Jacob.
That's right. So on top of NFL, you guys should know we share NFL tips. We've gone 75% on best bets. There's been 6 weeks of NFL, and we've hit a bunch of big multis. You might have seen we hit another big multi this week just gone. So that is a Saturday morning pod. It's up by about midday. It's just 15 minutes, just our NFL best bets. So if you do throw any bets or multis on NFL, you want to have a listen to that Saturday, Arvo, Sunday, anytime before you put your bets on for Monday. That's going to obviously continue for the next 4 months of NFL season, let's say. But in addition to that, we aren't going away. We are going to start a brand new show, which will debut in a week from now. So Wednesday nights will be the time slot. We may shuffle a little bit when it's up against Origin, obviously. But it's going to be more of a punting variety show. So I spoke about this in the group. We're going to look at all big events that are in the world of sport or racing for that week. We're going to take the time to give you punting theory. We're going to answer your guys' Q&As. You can get to know us better, but you can ask us anything you want to know. Guests, we're going to have interesting guests from the world of punting and sport and from the group. Get to know the characters of the group and people who are killing it and find out their methods. What else? We'll still give best bets. We'll have side bets. And we'll try and make it more fun. We're going to do story time, tell some great yarns from our lifetimes of punting.
Yes,
and there's some horror stories in there and some good stories as well. So, yeah, really looking forward to that. Next week, we'll start by also recapping this grand final.
Indeed we will, and I was just going to add on to that. If you're interested in perhaps being a guest, if you think you have something to add to the pod, a big event coming up, or if you'd like some questions answered, feel free to get in touch with us, obviously, in the Tripod app, in the group, or send us a message on the Tripod Facebook page. Anything else you want to add, Jacob, or should we get stuck in?
Well, we're diving into the NRL Grand Final, right? And I said we've done well in NFL, but in the NRL, we've given out over 260 best bets this season. We said to each other, completely honestly, after 4 straight seasons, I'm talking 2015, 16, 17, 18, of 60% winners or better. In 2019, we had 58%, and we weren't ashamed of that. It's getting harder and harder to win. And we said, nobody, not just us, but nobody may ever hit 60% for a whole season of a whole sport again. It's so hard to achieve. We've gone 62%, and we're super proud of that. It isn't a monumental achievement. Let's jump into the grand final. But your thoughts at all? Dally M was this week. Your thoughts on Whiten winning it?
It was surprising, I guess. And I'm not one of those people that dives into every single game of the entire season, because that's what you really have to do. But I understand that the Dally M is not exactly the best player of the season. Obviously, we know that. But I think from the outside looking in, it was Cleary was the best player on the best team in the regular season, and he got back. Did he get back those 6 points that they took off him? I understand that he lost 2 weeks, and in the end, I guess that cost him. But Whiten was good this year.
That's right. So it's worth saying in other sports like NBA, the MVP is voted on. So a bunch of people who are experts in the field or, journalists who follow the sport closely, they just vote who they think the best player was. And if it was done in the same system for NRL, Cleary wins. I think Cleary deserved it. You're right. They were going to take 6 points off him.
It's kind of a vote, right, though?
But it's the 3-2-1 every game, as opposed to just thinking who deserves it. And obviously 3-2-1 can be flawed. I saw, because it wasn't behind closed doors the first 13 weeks. And there were some games, there were head scratches who they gave the votes. And also it's just certain players stand out more than others. I think Cleary was the deserving winner, but I think Whiten probably was second best, so I can't have too many big qualms with him, winning it. He still had a whale of a season. And you're right, Cleary didn't lose 6 points. They were going to take 6 off him for technically being suspended in round 3 and 4. Then they said off-field indiscretion does not cover in that in the rules. But he did. It essentially, the TikTok gate cost him Dally M because that was 2 straight games that he didn't have the opportunity to poll points. But that's the way it goes. Of course, we're going to dive into this grand final, right? But I'll shout out Tim Butler. The Butler did it. He's messaged me and he wants to know our grand final tipping history. So I thought that's actually a great question to lead into the 2020 grand final. Let's super quick revisit how we've gone in the last 5 grand finals. We started the pod for the 2015 season, and I can tell you we've done really well in grand finals.
We have.
2015, we were on the Cowboys against the Broncos. It was basically pick 'em. I do remember going 2-1 on best bets. The one we lost, we had Cowboys over 17.5. If JT slots the sideline conversion, they win 18-16. It goes to extra time, they win 17-16. We lose that by half point. We still won on the game. 2016, we were on the Sharks as an underdog and unders. We got both of them. 2017, our only losing grand final. That was where the Cowboys made a run, and we were on them in a few of the upsets. We really liked them. And the line was double digits. We got 10.5 with the Cowboys. We thought it was too much for a grand final. We were wrong. The Storm won, if I recall, 36-6.
Yeah.
We were actually there.
We were there. That was the worst grand final to be at.
2018, we were on the Roosters. They were actually a slight underdog, I think, because Cooper Cronk had an injury, as we know.
Yep.
And they won. They won comprehensively, I believe. That final score was about 25-6. Was it 25-6 or 19-6?
Yeah, something like that. They won by 20 plus, I think.
Yeah, very comprehensive win. And last year, we were on the Raiders +8. Or it was either 8 or 8.5. And as we know, they lost by 6. So we've won money 4 out of 5 grand finals. One interesting trend, the Storm have been in 3 of the last 5. And if you include this year, 4 of the last 5. So they've been in 3 of the prior 5 to this.
Yes.
We faded them all 3. But we were right in 2, and the only grand final we got wrong, if you want to look at it the other way, was the one we didn't back the Storm. One other thing before we get into this game, which I think is interesting, I saw the odds for who was going to win the premiership just before the Panthers played the Rabbitohs, and the Storm was $1.85, which I found really interesting that they were $1.85 before the Panthers Bunnies game was played. Because there was a chance the Bunnies could have won, and surely the Storm would have been like $1.50 against the Bunnies. So when I saw they were $1.50 without the Panthers through yet, I thought that would mean that if the Panthers won, it'd be pick'em, or if anything, Panthers a slight favourite.
Yep.
Here we are now, and you can set the table and get into the game with the current odds as they stand.
That does seem super strange. Let's get into it. It's Sunday evening, 6:30. The Panthers up against the Storm. This one at ANZ. The Storm are 2-point favourites with the total sitting at 36 points. I'll set the stage a little bit, I guess, in terms of last week's games. Obviously, we did a tiny recap, but I was a bit under the weather, so it wasn't the best recap. But I mean, Storm, pretty cruisy win over the Raiders outfit. You know, they won by 20 points in that one, and Raiders just never looked in it. So you could say that was, you know, a pretty cruisy win for the Storm. But on the flip side, Panthers have an absolute grind against Souths, and, you know, Souths had a chance to win that one in the end. What do you think about those two games, Jacob, in terms of the prep? Obviously, Raiders have a way tougher game. Storm gets the 1 extra day rest. I know it's not, you know, a huge advantage, even though the Panthers still get that, you know, that 8-day turnaround. But the Storm have to fly into Sydney, which is a little bit of a grind as well, whereas Panthers just travel from Penrith. So in terms of the prep and all that sort of thing from last week, advantage who?
Well, firstly, I will say if the Storm were $1.85 leading into that game, it goes to show that because the Panthers weren't impressive against the Bunnies and only snuck home, and let's remember, they didn't cover the line when they beat the Roosters by 1. They didn't cover the line when they beat the Bunnies by 4. That has shifted the odds of this final. I think if Panthers have a comprehensive win, they're up 8 against the Bunnies at halftime. If they go on with it, these odds are closer together because now the Storm's like $1.70 to win. So It's dropped 15 cents, even though the Panthers got through. And obviously the Panthers posed a bigger threat. And compare that as well. The Storm couldn't have looked any better, really. And while they were impressive, they were awesome Friday night at Suncorp. Let's admit the Canberra Raiders were really poor with a lot of errors and a really slow start. You're right. Who's got the advantage? Well, the Storm, far fresher, rested their players in round 20, got a pretty, I won't say easy win over the Eels, but rolled over them second half for sure. Then they got the week off. And then, as we said, they really weren't pushed too hard by the Raiders, so they haven't had like a really grinding finals match. The Panthers played in round 20, played everybody, had a war against the Roosters, and had a war against the Bunnies. So and then, of course, Storm extra day, as you said. And the only thing I could say in the Panthers' favour is they don't have to travel. So you'd say freshness, a slight edge to the Storm.
Yeah, I would agree. Let's talk about where it's being played here. ANZ Stadium, obviously, Panthers played there last week, and we were mentioning how it's not exactly a home field advantage for the Panthers playing the Rabbits, which is their normal home field, at ANZ Stadium. Now, I think this state is advantage Panthers in the fact that they played there last week. I think that's a benefit. They've gotten used to the track there, and they're used to the prep. They went there last week. They're going to stay in the same hotel, whereas the Storm, they've been chilling in Queensland. I know that when it happened, when the Storm got relocated, everyone said this is going to be, a huge speed bump in the Storm season. They proceeded to just crush it from that point onwards. But, now they've played a couple of games at Suncorp, played last few games, Sunny Coast and stuff. But now you've got to travel, and they get the exemption coming in a day before. Sorry, Canberra fans, for that news. But I think that the stadium favours Panthers in the fact that, less travel and they're used to it, played there last week. What do you think?
And in fact, I totally agree. Plus, the Panthers have not left Sydney for over a month, which
Correct.
has to be a slight advantage. The Storm had to go down to Wollongong in round 20 and, of course, have to come down for the grand final. Mind you, it's a pretty short flight, but, it's still that little bit of disruption travel and having to go on a flight and sleep in a different bed the night before the game.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Now, looking at the line and the total 36. Now, we've said throughout this final series, not every total, but most of them, have just flown over the posted total. And it could be because of new rules, players just throwing it around a little bit more. This one is, I think, the lowest total that we've seen in the entire final series, and similar to like a State of Origin total sitting there at 36. Now, a lot of people will say that seems really low for two really offensively, the best offensive teams in the comp. But we do have to remember here that I looked at the weather report. It's going to be raining apparently Saturday all day, Sunday all day, going through to Monday. So I think from that weather report, it's not always accurate, especially on the Wednesday before the game if the game's on Sunday. But I think if you've got pretty much a 72-hour window, both sides of the game that says rain, I think we can pencil in that it's going to be wet. Who would you say this favours, Jacob, if it does rain on game day? Because I have my ideas about it.
Well, that's not a simple answer. I think, and in terms of wet, I think it's also going to be windy. But I will say this, and we can get into it more because it'll be a longer discussion, but it favours teams that wins the forward battle and the team that kicks better
Agreed.
in play. And, and I think we need to talk about each of those matchups more in depth. But in terms of the totals, as we know, week 1 of the finals was a points fest. 4 out of 4 games flew over. Week 2 of the finals, we bravely took an under in Raiders Roosters, and we got there with the under. The other game was Bunnies Eels, which flew over. And in the prelims, we just couldn't get there. We said, it's really hard to have a 60% confidence. As you guys know, we're 5-1 on finals best bets, but we reluctantly couldn't find a best bet last week. We lent on unders in both games. They were both about 44.5. And a lot of people pushed back and said, I'm not putting unders in my multi, and, it's going to be heaps of points, especially Bunnies Panthers. Both games went under last week, which I think also is baked into the fact that the total is that little bit lower, as well, of course, the weather conditions. Who do you think they give an advantage to?
So look, the first time I saw the weather report, it's always kind of the first thing that I do check. Immediately my thoughts went to the better forwards are going to win the, it favours the better forwards, and the Storm have the better forwards. And that was my immediate thought. So then I thought I'd dig a little bit deeper, look at the stats throughout the season. And like I've said to you multiple times this season, Jacob, just from the eye test watching this Panthers side, the forwards just seem to make a shitload of meters more than the opposition does. And I was saying, it's not only them making a lot of meters in attack, it's just the defense that everyone's kind of sleeping on for this Panthers side. So I thought I'd dig a little bit deeper and see if, what I was seeing with my own two eyes was actually true. And look, it is. The stats back it up. The Panthers have by far the most run meters of any team in 2020, more than 1,000 meters more than the second team. It's not even close. So the forwards are making some meters. Then, on the flip side, they've got the least run meters conceded. And second team, obviously, you can probably guess, it's the Storm. Least points conceded is the Panthers. 13 points a game is very, very solid. Once again, the Storm sitting in second place. So despite all these new rules and all this kind of stuff, it's going to favour attacking teams. That old saying, defense wins championships still, holds strong in this one. And I think you made a great point, Jacob, that in the wet, it really favours the better in-game kickers. And I think, honestly, Cleary's the best in the game. They're the number one in forced dropouts this year, and, the Storm are below average in forced dropouts, and that's going on averages throughout the entire season. 2.5 forced dropouts for the Panthers this season, 1.4 for the Storm. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly going to hold true in this finals game, but I think that tells, that's a telling story of how good this Panthers side has been throughout the entire season and how good Cleary's in-game kicking has been to force so many line dropouts and give that team, a chance of being on the offensive. And that's how they've kind of built pressure all year long.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in any game, possession is 9/10 of the law, and completion rates. Penrith let themselves down with completions last week, and that's why they nearly could have lost to the Rabbits. And the Storm always know if they hold the ball, they can always beat you because they do have such good forwards. You said the Storm have the better forward pack, just as a straight up statement, and I don't even necessarily agree with that. I just think the form, you bring in a fresh kick out into the Panthers side in the form of the likes of everyone, really. Yo, Martin, Vicious Fish, you got Tamau, arguably the weak link, and he's the captain in the front row, and a strong bench as well. But they both do, and it's hard to find an edge. But in a wet and windy game, you know that when they're playing conservative a little bit in the sense of trying to keep the ball, it's going to be all field position. And that does mean limited opportunities to score, and that's where in-play kicking becomes so important because those ball control, getting the ball back, and I think Cleary has the edge. He is a better kicker than either Munster or Hughes. Yep. I do think Cameron Smith's ability to kick from dummy half brings the kicking matchup quite close. But, what about bombs in a windy, swirling winds and rainy conditions? We know Cleary's bombs are just an absolute nightmare for the opponent. And a strength that the Panthers have is their diffusal of bombs, I guess you'd say. Like, I don't think there's many more reliable than Dylan Edwards under the high ball. And the Storm don't have players that can quite put up those floater bombs like Cleary does. I guess one other thing I should say is a lot of the game is played by teams in their own half. Storm did lead the NRL in tries scored from your own half. And you do think if there is a moment in this game where the game gets blown open with a long-range try, it's more than likely going to be the team with Munster, Hughes, Adokar, Olam, Vunivalu, and Papi.
Right.
But I guess on the other side of the coin, you could say in the type of conditions we expect, it's a lot less likely that you get those kind of openings, especially against such a good unit. And therefore, that's a less of a threat.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And that's why not only weather, but, in grand finals, in State of Origin, games like that, where defense really steps up, you don't have the kind of field position that you normally do in a regular season game, and there's not the kind of defensive lapses and openings that you have normally. And I remember it was like 1 year State of Origin, we were like, you've got these guys like Adokar and stuff, and we were like, well, there's not as many holes that you can shoot through, in a State of Origin.
Yeah,
I think it's
in fact,
it
was it 2019 Origin 1 where everyone's like, oh, New South Wales has Damien Cook and Cody Walker and Adokar.
Yep.
And, they're just going to be too fast for Queensland. When we kind of said, well, these are those guys run riot in an NRL game on a sunny afternoon against an opponent that's, has lapses. But the opportunities to strike for those type of players aren't there as much in the big games, and we should expect that. But I think it's more the case of like, who's going to win the balls here? I think it's going to be absolute war in the middle of the field, but it's really hard to really give either team a strong edge because they both have world-class players in the middle of the field.
Oh, they really do. And like you mentioned, like forwards, and that's where my mind went initially, because I was like, Storm, they're one of the best forward packs in the comp. But you're right. Like when you compare the two forward packs, it's pretty close, And like you said, Talma's probably the weak link, but I mean that's a guy that has like experience beyond years, and then you've got like Vicious Fish, who's arguably, and I don't think you'd argue with me, Jacob, in career best form, similar to like Jesse Bromwich and Welch and stuff like that. But I mean, then I go to the second row, and it's kind of a weird one because it's like in the wet. You're not going to have as many, playmaking opportunities. It's not going to be as open. So you kind of think, who's going to get the job done for you? It's going to be, Kaufusi, Kenny Bromwich, Big Nelson. They're just going to tear it up, just like, you know what you're going to kind of get out of them. But at the same time, especially in grand finals and State of Origins and games like this, like you said, it is often one or two brilliant playmaking moments, like when Isaiah Yeo cut through, last week to break the game into a double-digit lead. And it's like, who's making more meters? Probably those three for the Storm. But I mean, who's going to break the game open with one play? It's probably one of Kikau, Martin and Isaiah Yeo, So it's very similar in that forward pack. And, what I will say is a slight advantage to the Panthers. I know you mentioned that the Storm coming in a little bit more rested. But let's not forget, like you said, Kikau, suspended, not injured last week. So he's fresh, essentially coming off the bye. And Brent Naden named to start in the centres. He didn't even have a run last week. So, I mean, that's essentially another player on this Panthers team that got a bye last week.
Let's talk about the actual the lineups then, because you mentioned Big Nelson in the middle. I will say I would not be surprised at all if Dale Finucane starts.
Right.
And I do mention that because you guys might be putting on a first try scorer, and there was a post in our group last week that someone was saying they like taking front rowers for first try scorer. And he put it up for the Raiders Storm game, and then who scored first? It was Jesse Bromwich.
Right.
And people might be looking at Nelson. I know he plays lock, right? But Finucane was off an injury. They maybe wanted to play him off the bench. But Finucane is actually their preferred starting lock, and then Nelson is an impact player. And on Tyrone May versus Naden, I mean, that is brutal. If you had Naden, even as an anytime try scorer, I believe that resulted as a loss because he was in the 17, but played 0 minutes off the bench. Now, I think there's no certainty Naden starts this week. I mean, if they thought Tyrone May was the better option against the Bunnies, and now Naden's confidence may be questionable, I don't know for sure if they'd swap it. Now, I'm not going to say that I know more than Ivan Cleary, and that I'm not going to say one option is better than the other. I will say, whichever way they go, you trust that they know more than anybody else in-house, and they're going to go with the option that gives them the best chance. But I think it's worth pointing out, with the new rules, people think that it's going to open up opportunities in the middle, but what you're seeing as well is with fatigue in the middle, sides start to compress, and then the best sides score their tries out wide. They capitalize out wide. And as we know, the best sides, run with shape, where you've got lead runners, you've got, especially the Storm, they love a kick in behind the defensive backs for a guy like Vunivalu. Right. And of course, you got cutout balls to contend with. So the key to defending that is decision-making. They felt that Tyrone May, after Naden was a little shaky against the Roosters, had better defensive decision-making, whereas maybe Naden is a better pure ball runner. Tyrone May is a natural
offense-based defense, really.
He's played, and Tyrone May has also played in the halves in his career, so he's actually kind of more of a playmaking option. He can actually roam into the field. We've seen them both snatch kicks out of the air, so yep. I mean, yeah. So whichever way they go, but I mentioned it because I just wouldn't put Naden in anytime try scorer or first try scorer because I actually, if I had to guess, I think May will start the centres again, but I think they just don't want to give everything away to the Storm.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And it could be one of those ones where it's like, yeah, and you're right, because it's like sometimes it's a little bit of a chess match beforehand. Do you want to go through each individual section,
well, actually,
kind of like we did last time, Jacob?
I guess the other question mark is Coruscant. Went off with the shoulder injury against Bunnies, but he did come back on. Now, I believe he should be right to go. I think if there's a pain issue, he can have a needle. But in terms of the lineup, do you need cover for Coruscant? Because they haven't named Mitch Kenny on the bench. So I guess that shows they're confident that he's good to go. I wonder if Tyrone May could actually slot into dummy half if Coruscant was just out there and just busting his ass, in the middle, but just the shoulder wasn't right and he's carrying his arm. Does Tyrone May slot into dummy half, and then you'd have Naden on the bench to come in and play centre? Of course, if Naden stays in the 14 position, he can cover any outside back injury. And, you never know. It's the same as Origin. It's like you have to have a plan for any player because it's going to be a brutal game. So I think that's worth, at least considering that if you like Penrith, you'd want to know that Coruscant is good to go in this one as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, he's obviously going to go, I think, and whether he's 100% is yet to be seen for this one. But it's similar to kind of like guys like Munster that I mentioned last week. Because, we even said, we're pretty much 100% certain he'll play, but whether he's going to be, full go, we'll have to wait and see. And to be honest, watching him last week, didn't look like he was 100%. And whether he's going to improve for this week, who knows? But let's get to the spine, Jacob. I know this is the most important part in a grand final, obviously, kicking, dummy half, all that sort of stuff. And, if we let's start with the hooker, obviously. You just mentioned Coruscant and how the fact that he may not be 100%. Let's just imagine that he is for 1 second. You still obviously have to give, I think, the edge to Cam Smith at hooker. Just the big game experience. And honestly, mid-30s, is he mid-30s? Is he 35?
I think he's about 37.
Is he 37? All right, yeah. We've been saying for years that he's going to decline. It just doesn't seem to happen. So I give the edge there to the Storm. Now, for the halves, people are going to say this is close. It might be. I think it's an easy decision that the best halves in the comp are Cleary and Luai this season. Throughout the season, they've been the best halves. And, Munster didn't look 100% to me. And I think Hughes has been, while he's had some awesome games, he's also had some pretty average games. So if you ask me which halves do I trust in a game in the wet, especially with the Munster that, I can almost guarantee isn't 100% judging by what I saw last week, I give the edge there to the Panthers. And I also give the edge in a wet game to Dylan Edwards. And people are going to argue with me, I know, because Pappenhausen has some great tries this year. He's done some awesome stuff. But if you ask me which fullback I trust in a grand final where all you want to do is you want them to be safe under the high ball, to not make mistakes and to not do dumb shit, I trust Dylan Edwards over Puppy. And I know Puppy can just, score a try out of nothing, but I think it's a totally different story in a grand final to a regular season game.
Well, both these fullbacks, one of their great attributes is their just supreme fitness, and what that means, similar to a Gutherson, they're just always, and Mota allows them to always be near the action, and that's what you mean. I mean, his support play is unreal, but Edwards is not far off either. He's always in and around the ball, and that's on the defensive side as well. You're right, the halves, it's very close. I'm such a huge fan of Munster. I think he's an amazing player, and we know how important a running half is, but we didn't see him fully tested against the Raiders, and there are question marks about like whether he can reach top gear, things like that. And of course, in a game with the conditions and the style of play that we expect, you're not just thinking about the playmaking of the halves, you're thinking about their kicking game. So it goes back to the fact that Cleary can control a game like no other. Cameron Smith, 430 odd games in the NRL and still as good as ever, but Coruscant, is a superstar in his own right. So I think it's dead even, and I think it's justifiable to give an edge to Penrith. I would also give a tiny edge to the outside backs of Penrith. I just think we might have more explosive players, but I'm a big fan of To'o and Stephen Crichton, who I thought was actually
makes more meters than the forwards sometimes. The dude is like, he's like an NFL running back. The guy gets hit and he makes 5 more meters every time because his legs are so strong. And
speaking of making meters, and you spoke about the forward pack battle, but like a guy like Mansour is actually suited to a game that's played in poorer conditions, because one thing he still has is plenty of strength.
Yeah,
carrying the football. But do you see an edge in the outside backs? Maybe the best outside back on the field still at Okar, and can still take a game away from you in a moment though.
Well, and some height as well, I think, in terms of Naden. Like you mentioned, Tyrone May took a bomb, but it wasn't like he got up above the pack. He just got good positioning, But Naden can get up above the pack, and I guess that's the one edge where the Storm have over the Panthers wingers is you've got Vunivalu, who's a beast under the high ball. You've got Adokar, and they're going up against To'o, who's 5'0", and Mansour, who can't jump anymore. He's well past his prime. So that's the one advantage that the Storm have, and I think it's a fairly key one, especially in wet conditions, even though it's harder to come down with the ball in wet conditions. Like, if you just bomb it to Vunivalu all day, he's going to get some of those ones. But you're right, I actually give the slight edge to the Storm just because of that factor. I know, Crichton is arguably the best centre in the game at the moment, or the most exciting centre at least. But like guys like Olam He's gone to another level this year, and he's become actually a solid attacking guy. And although Brenko Lee is not really an attacking dude, he's more there for the defensive side of things. I'd probably give the slight edge to the Storm outside backs, but it's ever so close. And I mean, if you're looking at these teams in totality, Jake, who've just gone through forward spine and the outside backs, I mean, if you just look at this in a vacuum, like a lot of people are going to look at this game and just say, yes, the Storm are the better team, and the line does reflect that. But I mean, what we've just discussed, like I would argue that I think the Panthers could be the slightly better team here, if not even.
And I think you can make the argument they are if you're going to look at 2020 form. And that's because of the amount of Panthers players across the backs and the forwards that have had their best year. And it starts with Nathan Cleary, who's obviously the Panthers' favourite for Clive Churchill. And if you guys are asking about Clive Churchill, we'll cap this discussion with a couple of Clive Churchill picks and a talk about that. But I think, that's why it's such a great grand final, because you can really argue either side is the stronger side. Then you start looking at the intangibles and you start thinking about how the style of play. But another massive factor, and you can get on, I think you want to talk about coaching, maybe worth talking about goal kicking. But what about experience? People will say this Panthers side doesn't have the experience where the Storm do. And as I said at the top, this is their 4th grand final in 5 years. And it's worth mentioning that the 3 previous grand finals that they played, 16, 17, 18, They were favourites in all of them,
Yep.
and they only won one. And the one they won, they were double-digit favourites, so they should have won. 2016, they were down 8-0 at half-time, and they were favourites. 2018, they were down 18-0 to the Roosters. So, it's uncharacteristic because when you think of the Storm, you think they're like the hardest team to beat. You don't expect them to win every game, but you feel like they're going to make you play like 10 out of 10 to beat them. They're not going to give you anything easy. And you'd have to say they've been really disappointed and underperformed in a couple of big spots, especially their most recent grand final. Now, what about the Panthers? A lot of people who are picking the Storm will say they're not experienced enough. I just want to make this point. You could say the two finals games they've played so far have played out absolutely perfectly for them.
Yep.
Because why? They fell behind in both games. So they were down 10-0 in a blink of an eye against the Roosters. They were down 6-0, or was it even 8-0? Maybe 6-0. 6-0 to the Rabbitohs, because that kick came off the post. And that really tests you. That tests your resolve because the game plan goes out the window. Not only that, then they got out 28-10 to the Roosters and they got up 8 to the Bunnies. They also have the experience of holding a lead in a big match and having a team coming to get them and having to hang on at the end. So I think that's recent experience that is perfect for them to set them up for this grand final because they have been in a pressure cooker before. Whereas let's just say the draw shook out slightly differently. If the Panthers had rolled the Eels in week 1 of the finals and then played an underwhelming Canberra in the prelim, they might be in this grand final right now and have never really been tested. So while Storm, of course, have the bigger edge and experience, and maybe you want to talk about Craig Bellamy at this point, Panthers, I can't call them an inexperienced side. They've proven they can win in some really tough positions.
No, you're 100% right. And look, people always talk about big game experience, all that kind of stuff, but I think it's just the experience of dealing with adversity, I think, is what the more important part is. Because, you see some grand finals and, a team that, hasn't really dealt with adversity during the season, they'll get down early, they'll hang their heads, and they'll kind of give up. So that's more so what I'm looking for instead of, how many players have played, in a grand final before. I'd say how many times this team dealt with some adversity this season. I think that's the main thing. And you're right. The Panthers have shown not only in the last couple of games, but throughout the season, how can you deal with getting fucking punched in the mouth early and come back? And they've done it in the 2 finals games. They had a rough time against the Eels in the regular season game, in a huge game where things weren't quite going their way in the first half. They came over the top of them second half. So I trust this Panthers team that they've been through enough this season. The chemistry and the confidence is good enough. And look, what I'll also say is, sometimes in these big games, you've got these teams, cool, calm, and collected. Cleary seems like a pretty chill dude. He's always pretty level-headed. Sometimes I think that's been the difference with this Panthers team this year is, you need some fiery guys when you've got a pretty chill team. And Luai's been that guy, I think, this season. You just watch, every time they score a try, he's the first guy over there. If someone's fucking pushing and shoving, he's getting in there, even though he'd probably lose the fight to whoever he's going up against. But honestly, I see, he's running in to protect teammates. He's firing everyone up. And I think that's what Cleary needs a little bit. He's the cool, calm dude. And then you've got the opposite in Luai. But so I don't, think of it as a disadvantage that a lot of these Panthers guys haven't been in big games. But I mean, you've still got guys like Cleary, he's rep level play. You've got Tamau, he's played State of Origin. Coruscant's played, and won a grand final. Mansour's played Origin. There's not everyone that's inexperienced, not a group of kids out there. But I mean, the argument is obviously Bellamy. Fourth out of the last 5th grand final. They know what to do. And I think it's more so just the trip, the build-up, the week in the build-up, getting the players ready, getting them focused, keeping them away from the distractions in the build-up. So Bellamy knows how to do that a little bit better. I mean, this is going to be, like you said, his 4th out of the last 5th year doing it. But in saying that, it's a little bit of a different year once again. Normally they wouldn't just cruise down there the day before. Normally they wouldn't have been chilling in the Sunshine Coast for half the season. So, it's a little bit different. So yes, experience, advantage Storm, but I don't think that this Panthers team is full of young, inexperienced guys that are going to drop their head if they get down early, as we've seen in the last couple of games.
No, that's right. They've got this incredible youthful exuberance. They've got incredible team chemistry, and I spoke about that weeks and weeks ago. As you guys know, we gave out Panthers to win the minor premiership at $7, and one strength they have is that a lot of these kids played juniors together. They've come through. I think Tamau and maybe Coruscant. No, because they brought Coruscant back. Tama may be the only player who's not like a Penrith junior. I mean, I might be wrong by one or two, but the vast majority of the squad have played so much footy together. They're so tight. But I can't say the Storm aren't either. Right. I think the Storm have had a siege mentality. Hats off to them that they got displaced. They had to leave their homes and their families for some period of time, although I know they've gotten some of their families up into their bubble at Twin Waters at the sunny coast now. But it's an incredible achievement what they've done against that adversity to find themselves here. And you know what? When the Storm come up with a big play, push someone over the sideline, save a try, they get around each other too. They certainly look pumped. I don't expect Penrith to out-enthuse them. Speaking of the coaching edge, which you have to give to Bellamy, and you're right, it's in the preparation, not necessarily just the match tactics. We should mention that these two teams played earlier this year. So it was round 6. It was played at Campbelltown, and the Panthers did win that game. And I don't know if that's advantage Penrith. On one hand, it means they know they can beat the Storm and they know how they beat them. But I feel like there is always an advantage to the team that lost. A guy like Bellamy will go over that with a magnifying glass and see what Penrith did. But I think what Penrith don't have to worry about is that was so long ago, week 6. They've improved out of sight since then. So just because the Storm might figure out how the Penrith won on that given night does not mean they can stop them necessarily on Sunday. Have you got any other points or edges you want to read out before you share our plays? And guys, we have best bets. We have agreement for the grand final, in case you couldn't tell which way we're leaning.
Crazy that we actually agreed. I was actually, I did a bunch. I did more deep diving than I've ever done yesterday. And honestly, I thought I was going to disagree with Jacob, and I thought we might have to have the biggest side bet we've had of the entire season. But no, we do agree. We're on the Panthers for the grand final. A lot of you guys will be a little bit surprised with that. For now, we have two best bets. We're taking the Panthers plus half a try. That is $1.87 on Bet365. And we're taking a same game multi on Sportsbet that pays $1.80. It's the Panthers plus 8.5 points. You'll link that with the Storm plus 12.5 points. And that'll get you right to $1.80. And those are the only two best bets we have for now. We've mentioned that we're going to monitor what line moves happen throughout the week until Sunday and possibly have another best bet or two. But for now, those are the only two. Because we think that, and I think we're in agreement, Jacob, where you would think the public money would be on the Storm.
We've already seen the line slightly move. It was 1.5 a couple of days ago. It's now 2 everywhere. I think a 2.5 will pop up if people like the line. But we're happy with the plus half a try right now. We think that half a try can often be worth about 4 points. We think if they lose this game by 2, they've probably scored the same number of tries. The other advantage of that one, Bet365 result these at 80 minutes. If we go to Golden Point, or actually it's not Golden Point, it's extra time in the finals, then we will win.
We win.
Because extra time will mean they will have scored the same number of tries. Very unlikely you score 1 try less than the opponent and have the same score. But also, half a try is also even more valuable in a game where we think teams will take the 2 when it's on offer, because it should be a little bit more low scoring with a total of 36. I do want to say, the reason I'm so excited about this grand final, and I've made a case for both teams, because I think it's going to be an absolute cracker of a game.
Yep.
And if you feel that way, you will always lean to catching the points, catching half a try, catching, the start and whatnot, because this could be decided by the narrowest margin. And you can see that in our best bets and our second best bet, the same game multi, where we've got the Storm still being within 12, but Penrith being within 8. That is a 20-point window we can land, and we're getting $1.80 odds. So this is not us saying, it's Panthers, no doubt about it. This is us saying that we think it's bloody close and Penrith should probably be a pick'em, or if not, we think they can win by the tiniest margin, but they're clearly an underdog, so we just have to jump aboard.
Indeed, and what I will add, because a lot of people watching this will probably be leaning slightly towards the Storm, what I will say, if you're trying to make a similar same game multi to what we've done, what you can do is just, if you're like, 8.5 doesn't seem like enough for this Panthers side, you can flip those lines around and give the Storm plus 8.5 and the Panthers plus 12.5, and it'll give you the exact same odds. So because we like the Panthers in this one, we've given them a little bit less of a head start. But if you're leaning the other way, if you flip those lines around, that's still a pretty solid bet. Jacob, to end the pod, a lot of people are going to ask about it. Let's get to the Clive Churchill. And, let's just say that, if the Storm win, it's probably going to be Cam Smith. If the Panthers win, it's probably going to be Nathan Cleary. So I think they're both sitting at about $4.50. So those are the obvious choices. And I saw someone in the group that's just bet on both of those to win. which seems weird, but it'd probably be right. But look, if there was anyone else that you'd have to pick, let's say, from this Storm side or from this Panthers side, obviously we like the Panthers, but if there's anyone out there that likes the Storm for the win, give us someone from either side that you think has a chance outside of those top two.
Well, let me first just say with Clive Churchill, it's always very hard because it's subjective. So the way you go about it typically, first you try and see who you think is going to win the match, and then you think who would likely be the key player or the most important player in their victory, and then you shop around for the odds. The problem is sometimes the most deserving player doesn't even win it. I mean, what springs to mind is when Luke Lewis got given it, had a great game. He wasn't the best on ground in 2016. In fact, Thurston probably wasn't best on ground in 2015. And the player from a winning team doesn't always win it. I was happy with that, but Jack Whiten got it last year. And, other games spring to mind, like Billy Slater getting man of the series and man of the match in Origin just because of the narrative. And that's what you've got to factor in, the narrative. Yep. Now, you said it'll probably be Cleary or Smith. Well, of course, they're the most likely on each of their team because they are so important and they both fit the narrative. The narrative for Nathan Cleary is he should have won the Dally M.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Now, if he leads his team to a victory, then he gets it right. And Smith has won everything in his career except the Clive Churchill, surprisingly, and none of their grand final wins has he won that. And the fact that there's clear narrative out there that this may be his final game of rugby league, if it's even close, they probably give it to him. But we should say, do we think $4.50 is great value? I would say the big problem is the bookies are giving you no favors with those prices. They're keeping them super low. I mean, you've got a 50-50 chance to win the game. And then at $4.25 or $4.50, you're talking about getting like $2 or $2.20 odds that if they win the game, they're their team's best player. And you just never know who else might stand out. So for a long shot for the Panthers, see if you like this. If it's an absolute warfare game, if it's low scoring, how about the Vicious Fish?
Love it.
34-1 on Bet365, which is a lot higher than everywhere else. So if you guys think the Vicious Fish could put up some incredible stats and he could maybe get a try, he could maybe rattle someone's bones and force an error, like have some massive signature moments and get through a mountain of work, Vicious Fish 34-1. For the Storm, I would say Munster, my favourite player on the Storm, other than Smith, if it's somebody else.
What's he
I'm
at?
just not convinced. Munster, I think, around the $10, $11 range, but with him maybe not being 100%, I'll go Puppy because I think he could be the guy who breaks the game open as well, and he's always in and around it. You'll get $10 odds for him. That's if you like the Storm and you want to go someone longer odds than Smith.
I like it, mate. I like it. I've got a couple here that are a little bit longer as well. I've just gone with the theory that it's going to be a wet game. You're going to want an 80-minute player game. It's just more chances to make some plays, more chances to make some meters. So for the Storm, I've gone with Kenny Bromwich. He's sitting around $35, needs a bunch of meters and maybe even a try. I mean, he scored a few this year. That's all you need from one of these forwards. And for the Panthers, let's go Liam Martin. Over $40 you can get for him. So he's always involved. He's always, scheming around. He's good for a try or two. Maybe, you'd probably need one or two at least to get the Panthers, to get this one over the line. He plays 80 minutes. And I think that's what you need is in a game that you think is going to be a grind with a total of 38. One or two special plays could get you the Clive Churchill.
And speaking of these long odds and stuff, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if one or two bookies offer some enhanced odds. And, we're not saying don't back Smith and Cleary, just the odds. Like, they're not throwing a lot of value. But if a bookie comes out and says $6 or whatever, like bigger odds, it's probably worth a shot, especially if you think his team wins. And on that note, I think we'll do a full deep dive for, like, value plays, maybe first try scorer. We'll reiterate our Dally M long shot picks. We'll give you guys, like, a exotics pay, and I'm sure same game multis of varying risk. Like, look out for all that stuff. Not necessarily tomorrow. We've got till Sunday, but in our group and in our app for additional content, but as well as the possibility of adding a best bet. But we really feel good about the two that we're giving you guys tonight.
Indeed we do, and that's going to do it for this week for the grand final preview. I know we've gone a little bit longer, guys, but it's the grand final, and it's a cracking game. It's the one we all deserve, the two best teams of the season. So once again, thanks again for tuning in, and enjoy the game. Good luck on the punt. And look, before the grand final, if you want some NFL best bets, We do a 15-minute pod Saturday morning at 11 o'clock on the Tripod page or on the Tripod YouTube channel, so you can tune in to that one as well. And we will catch you guys Saturday morning and then next Wednesday to break down the NRL Grand Final and talk a little horse racing, talk a little Melbourne Cup. We'll see you guys then.
Lego.